Welcome back to Power of the Mind, where we give you simple tools to improve your relationship with yourself and with others. We're continuing our discussion today around family systems. We're talking about the 5 roles in the family system and how those roles apply to different people in different situations. Today, we're going to focus quite a bit on the lost child, which is one of my favorite roles to talk about because it gets overlooked a little bit. Hope you enjoy it.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning into Cast 11 at the studios with Talking Glass Media. This is Alicia, and I'm here with my therapy session, my favorite part of my week, with Greg Struve from Granite Mountain Behavioral Health. All those words. Care. Granite Mountain Behavioral Healthcare. Mm-hmm. Mouthful.
Yep.
Tell them a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a therapist, and we have a treatment center here in Prescott Valley that has about 118 beds, give or take, for our people who are in recovery from addiction. And then we have a large outpatient program as well that services all kinds of mental health opportunities for growth.
Awesome.
So, yep.
Doing good work. Doing really good work.
It's very enjoyable work and needed these days as well.
Well, it's funny because I mentioned to you when you first came in, I'm like, this is my therapy session, that I had no idea I ever needed. It's like, I'm fine. And then as we start talking, I'm always going, yep. There's some things I probably need to talk to somebody about. So I'll just sneak in questions every once in a while. I'll be like, friend wants to know.
Yeah, I'm asking for a friend. No, I think that's the case for a lot of us. If you don't spend a lot of time in this area, then when you do get into here and start listening to things, it's not uncommon to hear something and have it resonate and think, wow, that's really interesting. Human beings are incredibly resilient, so we can survive a lot and just kind of keep on going and think, well, that's not that big of a deal. It doesn't impact me. And to some degree, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Why not go through life? If life's working, why not?
Right. And
there's another approach, too, where you can think, well, yeah, life's working, but maybe I could be a little bit happier. Maybe I could be, there's that great book out called 10% Happier. I really like that idea. Maybe there is something that if I acknowledge to myself, maybe I'd feel a little bit better about myself or about my life or about other people, or maybe my relationships would change for the better if I looked at this. And then also, it's just darn interesting. It's interesting to learn more about all of our favorite subject of study, which is ourselves. We spend a lot of time studying ourselves as a general rule, and to get more language and information about that can be very refreshing and enjoyable. I think that's why I started doing what I do for a living.
Well, but just from what I see,
yeah,
perfect choice.
Oh, thanks. It's panned out okay so far.
Yeah, because I go into these like, I'm just going to keep it very professional, ask questions. And every single time I feel myself getting pulled in and like, tell me more about this. Or
sure.
So you're just very easy to open up to. So I really appreciate that. So
thanks.
What I love is where we left off last week with the whole family dynamic. That to me is something everybody can relate to, because you either came from a family, you have a family.
Right.
People who have families. It's somehow you're connected that way. But, we talked about, maybe you can run them down for us, kind of that birth order and, forgotten child and the scapegoat and all those things.
Yeah, there are 5 of them: the hero, the mascot, the mediator, the scapegoat, and the lost child.
The lost child. So as I talk to people, and some of my friends want to know.
Okay.
Well, and it's definitely that kind of lost child, because we all think about that and we go, oh no, not us. But then you start thinking, and somebody I was talking to this week was definitely considered herself the lost child. It was by 17, she was kind of out on her own, doing her own thing, and really without parent approval or help or just kind of, we didn't really have time to deal with you. We've got so many other things that we're dealing with.
Right.
And I think even to this day, she still feels like kind of that lost child, doesn't have that strong kind of relationship, with her parents that is kind of common with probably that hero. And we'll probably touch on that more, but
sure.
So my question to you is kind of, how does that work? And do you think, to me, I would think if you're the lost child, it's terrible, right? Wow. You're one of the lost boys and you're on some island and
oh no.
But couldn't it be viewed as a strength? Does it make you a stronger, because this person is super strong, super resilient. So,
the downside of the lost child as a position in a family system, if you're going to name family systems positions. The lost child has a bit of a negative frame of reference, and it can absolutely be a position that people choose and perhaps even enjoy. Oftentimes, it is a hybrid role, especially in a smaller family, where I will play maybe a hero early and then move into the lost child role. Or I'll play some combination of the two. I'll be a mascot and a lost child, depending on the circumstances. So I think much of the time when I talk to somebody who played the lost child role in their family, they will reflect on it as having pros and cons. Lost child dynamics include a lot of independence and a lot of free thinking and a lot of kind of alternative thinking. Lost children in the family system will often think, kind of outside the box, to use a bit of a cliche. It's really interesting to see what happens in a family system. So the hero and the mascot and the mediator are the three roles that all are, it's like there's three different ways to gain attention and gain significance that are sort of positive in the family system. And the scapegoat and the lost child are reserved for the kids who the family system doesn't necessarily understand or connect with intrinsically. It doesn't have to be that way. A lot of times what you'll see is a family system where the parents play a particular role and the lost child plays one of the roles or is more drawn to one of the roles that the parents just don't really understand. So for example, if I have two parents who are both heroic in their orientation, or I can think of, I have some friends and they're both mascots. They're both youngest children. They're hysterical. They don't really worry, but neither of them, they both dropped out of college at one point because they just sort of like, this isn't that much fun. I'm going to go have fun. And they're both doing very well despite not being in school. And in that case, they have a child, and the child is an only child. Now, an only child, often in a family system, an only child is going to be like a super firstborn. So they'll have all the traits of a firstborn or a hero, except even more so than normal. And they'll be like little adults, just kind of walking around. They'll have conversations like adults very, very early on. And yeah, that's how it goes. Well, that's very different than these two party animals that this little girl has for parents. And so they just don't really get her. I mean, they like her, they love her. But as she's gotten older, it's been interesting to watch her develop and at times take a bit of what we might think of as a lost child role, moving into a very independent lifestyle. And it's not to say that the parents don't try to connect and that the child doesn't try to connect. They just kind of speak sort of different languages. There are a lot of times, however, when I'm working with somebody who comes out of a lost child role where they really are in a space where there's been some neglect, or the family system has abuse or trauma or challenges around it, and the lost place is the safest place to hang out. And it makes the most sense. A lot of times if I'm working with somebody who identifies as a lost child in their family system, they'll talk about wondering at an early age if aliens dropped them off. Or if they got left by the stork and the stork had the wrong house. They'll literally look around the family system and they'll say, are these my people?
Yeah.
Really?
How did I get here?
This isn't right. Did somebody make a mistake? Usually around 7 or 8. And I can't tell you how often I have people, when I say that to them, they're like, whoa.
Yes. Yeah. You
are reading my mind, man. I can't believe it. And I said, well, it's really a common thing with this particular role in the family system. So that's they tend to have a sense of being a little bit neglected or left out. They'll often present as a little bit disheveled or disorganized. That's another trait. If they don't, then a lot of times you're looking at like a hybrid role. So I can have somebody like I'm talking about now who's a hero. And heroes are often very polished and put together. They'll be very thoughtful about their presentation. Whereas lost children tend to be less thoughtful and kind of scattered, kind of all over the place that way. So,
yeah, I'm glad you touched on, lost child doesn't necessarily mean neglected. It just means, and sometimes it does, but just finding that role. And it's interesting to me that some of the, I I have 5 kids, so I usually draw on that for reference when we're talking about stuff like this. But I have kind of that lost child's kid who just kind of, she's in, middle child of 5, went from being the baby, but the baby of like 3 young, siblings. And so it was, I still look at her today, but she's that kid that I got this. Like I'm good.
Yep.
I know where I'm going. I know what I want to do. I don't need to talk to you every day, but, and so that's interesting to me that she's not necessarily lost, but in the family dynamic, it was always like, wait, is she home? Okay. But
Sure.
she kind of did her own thing and just was she was that, kind of went that emo direction and kind of did that thing. But just kind of trying to find her way, I think is probably, but I don't think I recognized it until you and I started talking about that.
Well, it's pretty much, if you have 5 kids, it'll be really predictable that you'll have 5 that will fall into, at one point or another, kind of all 5 of the roles, more or less. Now, the extremes to which they go, right, it varies depending on the family system. We talked in another episode about the idea of trying to find that balance between being permissive and being rigid, and the structure of that situation and how much safety there is in the family. With more safety, the roles become less extreme and more fluid. I can move in a different direction. I'm emo for a couple of years, and then one day I change my mind, and everybody says, "Oh, you were emo, and now you're this." Okay, that's a relatively healthy family system, family dynamic. But yeah, it's pretty normal to have somebody in there who, if we think about it, each one of the roles is designed for the individual to find a sense of safety somehow, safety and significance, right? Safety and connection are the fundamental drives of human beings. Probably in that order, actually. Safety is first and connection is number 2, and they're very closely related. We have a sense of safety because connection is what allows us to team up. And when we team up, we move to the top of the food chain. We use our cerebral cortex to think about stuff and figure out what's going to happen. And so that is how we get to, tame or beat out animals or predators that would normally, it wouldn't go well for us, right? So when we're doing our family, when we're looking at family dynamics, each person plays a role. And the reason that there are roles that typically fall into a certain space has to do with the idea that the firstborn is just naturally going to get a lot more attention and naturally going to be the focus of attention. The next one is going to have to contend with the first one, and the third one has to contend with the other 2, and so on and so forth. And there are some natural slots that people will fit. A thirdborn child in a situation like that, it sounds like she might be a she or he. She might be a bit of a mediator as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And so for a mediator, there's a lot of peace in just being quiet.
Yeah.
Yep. I'll belong here. I'll find a sense of safety from just hanging back. They tend to be really, really consistent. They tend to have a small group of really tight-knit friends, and they're a really good friend to have. And they're extremely loyal, not particularly excited about change, not particularly interested in setting the world on fire. They don't want to go to Harvard. They're pretty content to go do something that is rewarding and significant, but they're the kind of folks who can show up at a company, when they're 25 and leave when they're 55 or 65. They spend 30 or 40 years in a single job. They're very steady and reliable and dependable. Good people to have around.
You better. Well, and it's funny because when you hear lost child, you think, oh gosh, this poor person is never going to find their way. But I think that it sounds as if there's perks to being kind of that lost child, because you're absolutely describing, my kid to a T. She's just very even keeled, doesn't like to rock the boat. If there's trauma or any drama going on, she wants to be the one to calm it down. And, she's got her same group of friends that she had in high school, and she keeps them very tight, and she is a loyal friend.
Yep.
So that's awesome. That's crazy.
They often, I don't know if she's married or not, but they often marry somebody who is a little higher strung, and then settle them down a little bit. They're this voice of reason and kind of peace in the situation, and they can just be they're really valuable and enjoyable to have on a team in a workplace setting as well. Because they slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you that too, is, with marriage, what would happen if a lost child married a lost child? Or is it that, because I feel I married a lost child but I definitely was not the lost child in my family dynamic.
No.
So it was, is it usually that it's kind of attracted that way, or does birth order have that play in that?
Oh, sure. Well, we tend to marry, this is a whole different set of theories, but if you look at how people select a mate, Harville Hendricks, many years ago, and Stan Tatkin more recently have talked a lot about mate selection and come up with some really valuable theories. And the most interesting one, I think, is this idea that we tend to pick a mate who has the strengths of both of our parents, and also oftentimes the weaknesses of some combination of our parents. Another shorthand way of saying it is you marry one and become the other. And so that's and from a biology perspective, that makes a lot of sense too. You have to remember your parents lived long enough to make you, which up until a couple hundred years ago was a big deal.
Yeah.
Nowadays, everybody lives.
Right.
Back, the Romans didn't name their kids till they were 6.
I remember you saying
they were just kids were just a thing. Like you just, hopefully you're 6, come on up. We'll keep you again.
You get to sit at the table now.
Congratulations. Yeah. And so the idea, I can't remember what the mortality rate was, but to make it to the age that you could reproduce was remarkable. And biology would look at that. And for the first 6 years of life, you pay very close attention to the immediate environment, and you will download a lot of data that way. So that tends to be how things balance out when all's said and done. In terms of family roles, my observation is that we tend to, the old adage, opposites attract. Mm-hmm. We tend to seek out somebody who can offset our own weaknesses. And then we think they're a huge pain in the butt, sometimes for 10 or 15 years. Mm-hmm. And then things tend to settle down a little bit after that.
Yeah.
Or not, or they wrap up.
Yeah.
Or people are miserable, but these days most people don't stay miserable. They just call it a day.
Yeah, they'll be done. They tap out pretty quick.
Yeah. The old 7-year itch, as they say, which is interesting because when you look at the patterns in marriage, in the first 6 months to 2 years, you have the honeymoon. And in the honeymoon, we see each other only for the strengths, and we see our weaknesses being offset by that person. It's delightful, and it engages parts of the brain and neurotransmitters that we can't actually figure out how to put into a legal drug. There's some speculation that ecstasy, appropriately named, ecstasy pings some of the same parts of the nervous system that falling in love does. But there's a big hangover, and it has some challenges. Falling in love, much safer than doing lots of ecstasy.
I would assume.
I would recommend it. And there are folks who get perhaps a little bit addicted to that part of the process. Yeah. And what you'll find is they go 6 months or a year or so in relationship and then decide, I
need another hit of that love, right?
Wait a minute, I didn't know you were going to fart in bed. I'm not doing this. This is craziness. This is crazy talk. Something happens, and they shift into that next stage, which is the power struggle. And the power struggle lasts about 7 years, give or take. At the end of the power struggle, we decide to stop changing each other as a general rule. And we figure out, by the way, I think it's 69 or 70% of the problems that you'll have at year 10 in your marriage, you had in year 1.
But you just didn't.
No, they don't resolve. We all think, this has got to change. And eventually we give up trying, and we decide to keep, or we decide to leave, right? Or we just decide to keep the person we're with, and that's, you end up in a functional relationship.
And I think year 1, I can change him.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to change.
Oh,
right?
for sure.
Yeah, my husband is the same guy today that he was 32 years ago. So there's
it's kind of
no
a funny
changing
thing.
him. But so is it pretty common, like with birth order? So I'm a firstborn. So
sure.
I think it's very shocking to me when I find firstborns who don't act like firstborns.
Oh, yeah.
And in my opinion, firstborns are that strong. Let's go, follow me. I'll show you the way. And, the overachievers type thing.
Yeah.
And that's what I would assume, so with that birth order, are all firstborns the heroes? And I know you kind of said they kind of shift a little bit.
You end up about 80% is my observation. And again, none of this is scientifically validated necessarily. Like, these are observations originally developed by a guy named Alfred Adler, who was a peer of Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud and some of those guys, really the beginning of modern psychology. And Adler developed a lot of the family system stuff. Adler also developed the precursor to what is called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is basically what we now call therapy.
Right.
Before Adler, you had all those sort of stereotypes about people laying on the couch. That was Freudian analysis. And Jungian stuff got mixed up in there too. But in the 1960s, cognitive behavioral therapy, which was the eventual fruition of Adler's work, took over counseling. And that's what we have now as a general rule, as a base to all this other stuff that we do. But no, about 80% of the time, the birth order element will hold true. And about one of the things that makes it interesting is with human beings, about 20% of the time something else will show up. When something else shows up, it's often about safety. And I also think there's a degree to which some people come out of the womb you'll have a last-born child every once in a while. They're supposed to be mascots. You'll have a last-born come out just full of piss and vinegar and just shows them all up. Just runs the gamut and becomes the CEO or the whatever it is. There was an interesting study I read. We're talking about birth order, and this is many years ago, but they took a look at 40 world-famous stand-up comedians, and I think 38 of them were last-borns in their family system. And
that makes sense to me, though. That
of the presidents of the United States, I don't remember the number, but it's single digits that are not firstborn. The vast majority of them are firstborns. Also a disproportionate number of only children, if memory serves me correctly.
That makes it makes sense to me, just kind of knowing, how I am and how, I would never imagine like the baby of the family, I'm going to go be president, it's
right,
just,
exactly.
But I think the pressure of, being that firstborn, because for me, being the firstborn, it was like, your dad's favorite, your mom's favorite, mom talked to you more. And then I just remember, like, for me, I got a sister, but dad, I was still dad's favorite. That never changed, even today. Sorry. But, but the pressure of being that, and I think really in our dynamic, my sister was fine with that role. Like, you go ahead because you've got huge shoes to fill and you have to, like, that standard is not something that anybody wants to take it.
Sure.
So I'm wondering, do firstborns just kind of, they're born into that and really nobody wants to challenge them for that role?
Well, nobody wants to and nobody can.
Yeah.
I mean,
because I wasn't going to allow it for sure.
And if she challenges you, which she probably tried a couple times early on, she just lost because you're bigger, stronger, smarter, and faster.
Yeah.
It's just that's nature.
Yeah.
And that's part of why this is such a predictable system. It's just logical. The second-born is not going to beat the firstborn. The third-born is not going to beat either of them.
Yeah.
Better find something to do. I'm not going to be smarter, faster, bigger, or stronger. Better find a different way to make a mark in this family so that if the going gets tough, I get to stick around.
And that's when you become the comedian. You become the emo kid or the lost kid. And
sure. Then the lost child, one way of thinking of that one too, it depends. There's different. We can also be talking about neglect, right? The lost child is a role. Neglect is a form of trauma that's really interesting and actually really challenging to recognize. So it's a slightly different conversation, but a lot of folks who have some neglect will present in the lost child role in some respects. They will tend to be very, in relationships, they tend to be very eager to connect and stay connected. And sometimes depending on the partner they choose, they can sometimes come off a little bit needy. For example, the lost children sometimes will get into relationships that mediators can do this too. They get into relationships that maybe they take a little more crap than they should. That's a common characteristic there as well. So
I could see that for sure. And I think with very healthy families, those roles, just kind of typically just basically happen. Do you see families that have more trauma, that this is more pronounced? So if there's, abuse in the family, do you see that real hero really be an extreme hero? Do you see that lost child really be that lost, quiet, kind of hide in the trenches?
Sometimes that is true. Yeah, the more challenging the family system, the more pronounced the roles can become. You can think of the roles in part as a defense mechanism, or not even a defense mechanism, but just a way of working in the world and functioning. And the less safety I feel at home, the more likely I am to lay back or lay into those roles a little harder. So yeah, it's a great way of putting it.
Yeah. Well, I love kind of the direction that we're going, just kind of previewing. I've got another long-term personality traits of each role. So as a child, thank you, my little side director over here. She's got little questions popping up. For me, I was the hero always.
Right.
And the protector. Mm-hmm. So I always made sure, even though I was hero to dad, protector to mom always. And then as I got older, same thing, always, mom wasn't always making the best decisions. So I was always that kind of protector and watching out,
A little battlefield promotion.
Yeah. So I noticed that, for me, I'm that way now. Like even it's really carried, stuck with me that I am that, if the kids are fighting, I always will jump on the side of the one who's not, if there's two against one, I'm always again, come on, let's go fight them together, So I think I've always been that kind of protector. So do you see that trait? Or because I know I was the hero protector for a very long time. And then when that role was no longer needed, that's when I kind of went into the rebellious kind of lost side. And so, but then as soon as I righted the ship, I was back into the protector hero again.
That makes sense. The other thing that can happen too is when you're in a situation, you're talking about taking up for your mother a little bit. And for a kid, that's a really unfair role to have to play. And the kid knows that, right? And they'll play it in part because it needs to be done. Right. Somebody has to take care of the family system, and in part because it's a really significant role in the family, and the more significant a role I play in the family, the better it is for survival. But there's always a piece that is really frustrated about that, and there's a little bit of betrayal that comes with it a lot of the time too. And so the result of that often is a sense of, this system isn't really in this for me. I'm going to try this on my own. And then I'll go out on my own and I'll try it on my own. And a lot of times I'll have a really good time, but I'll feel lonely, and intense feelings of guilt will accompany almost all of my acting out behaviors. I'll go back and forth. If I'm a hero and I have this, they call it the scapegoat side, there'll be really intense feelings of guilt. And I'll waffle back and forth. And then they also tend to do, their rebellion is covert. It's under the table most of the time. Unless they're really, really mad, then they'll show something to the people. But that's and then the challenge that'll come up too is a lot of times in relationship to particularly women who need rescuing, there's going to be some distance later on in life, right? If there's female friends who have that trait, there might be a proclivity toward distancing yourself in that situation. That's a really common characteristic. But yeah, it's really difficult to go through that situation and to understand how it impacts a person, is a process to it. So
yeah. I could talk to you for hours. Like, get out of my head. You're talking right there. Well,
yeah, these are just really predictable patterns. It makes sense. It's a logical choice to make in that situation.
Yeah, and it's for me. I married somebody, being the hero role and protector role. I married somebody who I saw as a protector, and so I sought that out, which is funny to me because I. Being that strong-willed, I wouldn't think I need protecting, but I always wanted to make sure the person that I found was that safety, was going to be safe all the time. But my sister married somebody who was very controlling and very strong-willed. And so I thought that was kind of funny because my husband is very laid back, but, I know like he's going to protect me no matter what.
Right.
So it's just funny to me. It's, do you seek those roles, or do you, because I never thought about it until I started sitting down with you. I'm like, wow, that's crazy. That's kind of how I went. I was the protector. My sister was the baby and the
Right.
kind of the forgotten child too.
Right.
But her husband is very much the man of the house, and very strong, and, very, things are done a certain way. And I would never be attracted to that type. So I didn't know if that was, kind of that birth order thing as well.
Oh, sure. Well, again, there's a lot of different motivations that we have in picking a partner. One way of thinking about it too is we noticed that you did a lot of protecting and then rebelled a little bit. And then through guilt, or the other thing that'll happen when a hero rebels is they'll do something really dangerous, and they'll look around and say, I'm going to stop doing this. This is not a good plan. I'm going to, they'll have a moment of clarity where they'll say, this isn't a good idea. I'm going to stop doing this. I'm going to go back to the way things were. One way of thinking about it too might be that, you grew up as a protector and said, this isn't a bad job, but I would like to make sure that I don't have to do this later. Mm-hmm. I'm going to pick somebody who I know will protect me. Yeah. I'm going to go a different direction. In the case of your sister, it's hard to say. Perhaps in her situation, she grew up with a lot of protection and decided she wanted to keep that.
She enjoyed that, probably.
Yeah, that works for her. And
well,
the other thing, go ahead.
I was going to say, she never had to be that protector, because I not only, looked out for mom, but I always made sure, my sister is, I always protected my sister. So maybe she gravitated towards that of always feeling protected. Who knows?
Yep. And that absolutely can be the case.
Interesting.
And the youngest child mediator style, mediator mascot youngest child, the other thing is they tend to be, when they pick a partner, they're just pretty laid back. And so having a partner who is a little more, or who is less laid back, it can often end up as being a pretty good balance. Not always, but sometimes.
Well, I think, you tend to, I think I've changed a little bit to be more like him, and he's kind of, I pulled him a little to. That's what we do. To this side, kind of. But it's been a good balance. 32 years and 5 children. So.
Well, that's the beauty of marriage too. And this is one area where I feel some concern, I think, for the new generation. When we make relationships kind of modular and easy to replace, it really tends to, if we look at what happens psychologically in the context of marriage, it's miserable. Marriage is really hard. Anybody who tells you differently is usually got something to sell you. Marriage is awful. And the reason it's awful, at times anyway, is because you have two people, and once in a while, I shouldn't say awful. There are some people who have a really easy go of it. Good for them. That's great. And when you have two people together, we have to figure out how to work together. And that means I have to be a little bit less selfish every day. Yeah. And most of us, I'll just speak for myself. I'm pretty selfish. So my wife had her work cut out for her, Yeah. And through the marriage, I've grown a lot, and probably only in ways that no therapist could ever have helped me. The marriage has helped me in ways that no therapist ever could have. And so it's interesting to see as that becomes one of many institutions that are coming under fire and moving at least to be less prominent in the culture. It'll be interesting to see how that works and what impact it has in terms of, having people continue to not necessarily develop the muscle of, I don't know exactly where the metaphor was going here, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Well, I get it, because it's back in our day, it was you get married, you have children, you buy a house, and sometimes not in that order, sometimes different orders, but that was the norm.
Right.
Everybody got married, you found your person, and that was it. And now I look at people that are in their late 20s, I'm like, you're not married? No, don't want to get married. No
ever.
Kids? No, don't want to have kids. I'm like, what? 30 years ago, you don't want to have kids? I don't understand. But now it's so different now but I do think we're a more selfish society now, and go for it. If don't have kids for somebody else, you know what I mean? Or don't. But I do wonder how people are going to change, because like you said, when you get married, you you learn to adapt to another person. And so I'm just wondering, with more and more people not choosing to go that traditional route.
The other thing that's really interesting, that'll be interesting to see, is a family system that has two parents in it. Biologically, we have been seeking that out for a really long time. And there is something significant about, particularly, I can't remember, the study was something like 25% of children now are born into a home without a father.
Wow.
And that's a really significant deal, psychologically. And I don't know if I could even put words to, the relationship between a person and their dad is really significant. And when we have men who are not learning to be less selfish through there are a variety of ways in which that had been taught for many years. I'll just be really curious to see how that goes, right? Because being a dad's hard work.
Yeah. But 30 years ago, most kids were born to that, two-person household, and that's just, and now things are so different that it's...
I wonder what the percentages were and how they've changed.
I don't want to put Batman on the spot because that'd be a hard one to even...
It's a tough one to Google. Yeah, tough one to Google.
Google.
So anyway, you were asking earlier about the traits of the roles throughout the years. And I think it's really interesting to go over the traits of the lost child first. It's funny, when I'm doing this in a public setting, when I'm teaching, I'll always say, let's see, we got the hero, the mascot, the mediator, the scapegoat, and what was the other one? Oh, yeah, the lost child. Because I like to tease the lost children a little bit. But
okay, man.
Yeah, the long-term traits of all the characteristics. Again, it tends to become a bit hybrid depending on where they land. But with a lost child, they tend to feel a little bit neglected and forgotten. And when they get into adulthood, they tend to be a little sensitive to that. And that'll be something in their intimate relationships, whether it's friends or partnerships, they will be alert to and interested in not doing. They tend to be very interested in relationships that they do have continuing, and they will go to great lengths to try to make that happen. They tend to be a little on the disorganized side unless they have a hero sort of overlay to their stuff. And I'm trying to think of other long-term characteristics, but that's about all that comes to mind as far as the lost child goes. When they come out of a neglect situation or a difficult situation, they tend to have a really low self-esteem. The one thing about the lost child and the scapegoat, the lost child has a low self-esteem, and they'll tell you. The scapegoat won't tell you, but they know it. But the lost child's self-concept is pretty low, and they can really struggle at times with self-defeating behavior, self-sabotage, getting into situations that are good and finding a way to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. That's a real common concept. We talk a lot about a thing called the shame existence bind. So with the shame existence bind, I have the idea that that there is something innately wrong with me taking up space. And so when things affirm my right to take up space, big successes, promotions, anything that puts me into the limelight for a minute, I will just shrink back and find a way to kind of get that done. They'll often report not liking their birthday very much, for example. Things like that. They have this interesting challenge where connection is my deepest need and also my deepest fear. And so they can be very challenged in that regard. So those are some of the characteristics we can talk of with regard to somebody who's been through stuff like that.
You know what I'd like to do, because I know we're running a little bit long, is can we put a pin in this right now, and then let's start another we can do for next week.
Yeah.
Look at more of the characteristics of like the hero and, this how they started out and kind of where you see them in their adulthood.
Sure.
And kind of how that, because it's easy to see kind of those lost children. What about the baby? What about the hero, all of that? So if you're good with that, I'd love to kind of.
I'm in.
Cool. All right. Well, you guys, thank you so much for joining us. As always, if you have questions, check us out on Facebook. We'll give you an opportunity to post questions there that we can answer for you. Nothing off limits. You don't have to be, if you feel more comfortable sending us an email, you can send it to sales, SALES, at signalsaz.com. Anything you want to ask, you totally anonymous. Just a really good time or if you're thinking of, hey, this is great. This is something I'd like to do weekly, just talking it out, because even this little podcast that we do once a week is just so interesting to me and really kind of unlocking things. So I tend to get a little selfish and ask questions that I want to get answered, but you guys give us your questions. We're happy to bring them up here in this forum, and excited to start helping more people out there, because I think this is great. And
sure. Great fun.
So again, Power of the Mind, Greg Struve with Granite Mountain Behavioral Healthcare.
The care. Good job.
Care. You know me, I'm that carer. I'm the person who cares, takes care of everybody, but forgets that word. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week.
If you have a question or something you'd like us to discuss here on Power of the Mind, we would love to hear from you. Our email address is stories, STORIES, at signalsaz.com. That's stories, STORIES, at signals, SIGNALS, AZ.com. Look forward to hearing from you.